All right, Ryan Callahan, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Congratulations on fatherhood. We'll kind of start. We talked about that a little bit off air. So, how are you adjusting to the 4:30 p.m. dinners and the schedule of being in charge of a human, co-in charge of a human?
There's parts of this that are just like they fit into my, decade plus of guiding and multiple decades of like seasonal employment mindset. And it's kind of seamless where it's
Mm,
well, this is the time to do it. So you got to do it.
hmm
Be up, be up before everybody. Take care of it. And the thing, and I talk about this all the time, is with bird dogs, you always try to like replicate the things that you like, right? And I absolutely love my dog Snort, and she's been like easily the most talented dog I've ever had. She's probably the worst trained Labrador I've ever had, but just full of talent and is the best pheasant dog I've ever had. And I think truly an exceptional pheasant dog. And her sister, out of the same litter that Snort came from, was having her last litter.
mm,
And so we got a puppy out of that. And the puppy is on its 13th week. The boy is a month plus or 2 months plus 1 week. And in that week, he's just started like really tracking you
mm,
and smiling. And there's like some back and forth now, and nobody prepared me. You hear all these horror stories about colic and allergies and all sorts of things. Kids that just totally refuse to sleep, blah, blah, blah. But what nobody ever said is like, you're going to do all this stuff for that kid. And in my mind, it's not like that hard. It's just like fully consuming. So it's hard, when I absolutely love my BHA job
hmm
and I'm a workaholic and I want to be 110% there all the time and train bird dogs and go out for a freaking trail run every now and again.
hmm
But at the same time, it's totally okay to be fully consumed with this child. But what nobody tells you is there is no recognition of you, let alone anything that resembles like a pat on the back,
hmm
right? Like, thanks for all the diaper changes and the feedings and the being on demand 24/7.
Yeah.
And that recognition of just like you as a person for us came about 7 days ago. And in comparison, this puppy is like you feed it one time and
Mm.
it's like you are the best thing on the planet. I love you. We're going to be together forever. And no matter what I encounter, you are the best person ever.
hmm
And so there's like an instant gratification parallel going on with this thing that, like you're just kind of always going to be earning,
Yeah.
I feel. So,
Yeah, I called my mom a couple weeks in. I said, "Mom, hey, I don't think I ever said this, but thank you for the diaper changes. I never even thought to thank you for that. Thank you so much for all those little things." And it's pretty wild. But
it is.
you gained popularity, if not fame, for your involvement in Meat Eater, which is a dream for many. So you could have just stayed at that level or that level of engagement. So why step into the role of president of BHA with so much more else going on? Why did you take that extra step? And that's definitely a service role.
Yeah. I mean, there's so, especially now more than ever, I think for profit businesses can play such a huge role in conservation and it's very important. And it's, when we talk about, advocating for something, politicians want to hear from everybody, and it can't just be the nonprofits that are in there. You have to find for-profit representation and the whole gamut of hook and bullet nonprofits to show like this is something that the majority wants and thinks is good, whether you're pushing back on legislation or pushing for new legislation. And yeah, I think it's a really important role. The My whole history in like non-seasonal for profit, so like starting at the clothing company First Light, we made a concerted effort, not because it was part of the marketing plan or the business plan, to make our customer base aware that they could potentially lose access or ownership of public lands if they weren't engaged. And that was like a radical thing back in, way back in 2011, 2012, 2013. And it unsettled the industry a lot, but it took our tiny little brand and made it on like literally on par with the biggest brands in the industry. And it wasn't fair at all, but it was an amazing bit of history to keep track of if you're thinking about starting a business selling something. Like there's a way to do it and stand for something that increases the bottom line of the business.
Mhm.
And we had no marketing budget, and our literal just awareness that we bring to these issues took care of that for us
Mhm.
by and large. At the same time, that wasn't my job. My job was to create clothing and sell clothing.
Mhm.
On the meat eater side of things, conservation was a huge part of my job, and making sure all the businesses and the forward facing folks, that the influencers were aware of issues and prepared to weigh in on them, and then identifying big things like our land access initiative, providing new stuff, but providing new access opportunities. But a huge part of my job was still tied to, I still had to do the content creation. And that content creation, I worked really hard to make it accomplish my objectives in the conservation space, but it just wasn't 100% what I wanted to do. And when the board, asked me to just sit down and have a talk about this possibility, I was outside a sales meeting, which done far too many of, and it was very good timing in that. And I was like, man, I'm just not qualified in so many ways and would like to find somebody better. And the board said, hey, we know what you are qualified in, and we can help you with the rest. And, we think this would be awesome. And it took me about 3 days to be like, man, this is exactly what I want to do.
Mhm.
And, I'm not going to lie, like the previous gig, there was plenty of computer time, but man, there's so many opportunities for outside time and comparatively messing around that people should be envious of, because that's just not something that you get out of a lot of gigs.
Right.
But in a lot of ways, BHA has been like more relaxing and less stress
Mm.
because I don't have this weight on my shoulders of like wanting to do more.
Mm.
In BHA, nonprofits, a business too, we got a lot of things that we're trying to get done for the very first time that are internal for the strength of our employees so they can more effectively tackle the mission. And there's a gajillion little reasons to be stressed over like wanting to make things move faster, get things implemented quicker, or just be doing more and more and more. And, I don't think that will ever go away. But again, at the same time, like everything that we do is like directly tied to public land, public water, public wildlife, equitable access to those things, stewardship,
Mhm.
and it's just sweet.
Mhm. Was
So it
this
was kind of a no-brainer at a certain
Yeah.
point.
When you were a kid, was all this important to you? Were you 13 years old running around and thinking about the future of trout populations or public land access and animals, or did you kind of evolve from a consumer hunter, like, I remember as a angler growing up, I just consumed. I didn't think about
Yep.
populations, I didn't think about the future, I didn't think about ecosystem, so I kind of evolved into a, "Oh, we gotta worry about protecting this, we gotta do what we can to make sure we have access, make sure that we keep people accountable." Have you always had this mindset for conservation, or did you kind of evolve into it and take advantage of opportunities to be a leader?
I would say really didn't come around till my late 20s. So I have a huge Montana family, kinda for they're spread all over, but we'll just say like an Eastern Montana family, Western Montana family, a lot of agriculture, and then a lot of, Montana's growing up fast, but even our cities aren't big cities compared to a lot of places still. But a lot of folks in the cities and I had a level of awareness of, you know, uh, very, very bare bones, like how things work, how big cows make little cows, stuff
Mm,
like that. But, and I was enamored with hunting and fishing and just enamored with being outside and had a lot of ways to make that part of my every single day, even without having like real mentorship on hunting and fishing when I was young. And, but I had a dad and a mom who would really like provide for the opportunities, but their skill sets were pretty narrow,
mm,
right? And even into my guiding career, there's like some invasive species stuff on the fishing front. There was some noxious weed stuff on the hunting front, but nothing that ever made me be like, "Oh my god."
mm,
Until I got out of the Frank Church Wilderness, we were guiding in there. It was an awesome season and gorgeous and super cool and awesome people. And I came back to Missoula, Montana, did what everybody did at that point. Had a pocket full of guide tips and was going to go drink beer and chase girls, right? I'd been in the woods for 5 months. And my buddies were like, "Hey, we want to go to this meeting." And I was like, "No way, not going to happen." They said, "Well, there's free beer." I said,
mm,
"Okay, we can start there." And it was like right when BHA moved to Missoula. And, they were talking, and this would have been like 2009 ish, I think. They were talking about the idea that there's people out there trying to sell off public land, divest ownership in public land, rescind the Wilderness Act to allow for motorized vehicles, all of these things. And it was so incongruous with what I was doing and had been doing every single day. And just the idea that people wouldn't like what we have
mm,
or want to like drastically change it, I'm like, and I wasn't making much of a living, but my whole living was like taking people not from these areas through these areas on these hunts and fishing trips. And, you know, it was like mixing oil and water. And by the end of the trip, they would just be like evangelicals for
right,
wilderness areas,
mhm,
right? And have these big transformative experiences. And I was just like, man, this just cannot be true. And they had asked if anybody was working on federal land. And as a guide, I was. You know, almost everything throughout my career by the numbers would be on public land versus private, but there was definitely some private land guiding in there too. And that was a real shock, but I didn't really do anything about it. That BHA meeting was really important because they were like, everybody here has a voice and your voice matters. And if you have these stories, that matters a lot right now.
mhm,
Because the story being told in DC is that nobody's out here, nobody's making a living out here. Everybody hates this stuff. It's anti business, it's anti growth, it's anti everything America stands for. And then the flip side is like there's all these hardworking Americans who have chiseled out a life in these areas, mom and pop, homegrown businesses, some of which have gotten very large and support a lot of employees, and they are discounted too. Well, not those, but they don't count either. It's like, yes, that's an example of, the American way and the American dream, but for our purposes, those people are discounted too,
mhm,
right? And so that was a super important thing, but yeah, it wasn't until that big smack in the face of we're going to sell public land, and here's some bills that are going to erode the Wilderness Act. And when reading the language in particular, because I always like to read this stuff, you could just tell you're like, oh my god, if I wanted to erode this stuff, I could do it in a way because I know it and I've lived it and I've
Mm,
breathed it. And it is so clear to me that whoever wrote this stuff has never stepped foot in a wilderness area. So how
right.
could they possibly know?
Yeah.
They have never stepped foot on US Forest Service ground. So how could they possibly know?
Mhm.
Because the people who wrote this are not using the language of the end user.
Mhm.
Like, it is just clear that they're not connected to this resource at all. And that was like a vile affront to me
Mhm.
because it just showed like there's an outside interest here that has to be getting paid by somebody because they just show that there was never any investment in these areas.
Mhm. The story of last summer was kind of unity and beating back some of those bad ideas when it comes to public land and selling off public land, and it was kind of a victorious high point. What's been the story of 2026? Because everybody was mentioning that this is a temporary, we did a good job, but we have to stay vigilant. So what's the story of 2026 versus last summer that seemed to be pretty unifying and pretty encouraging?
Yeah, well, 2026 was a favor in the fact that, or the I would say the land sell off and the budget reconciliation package was a favor because it was another one of those very clear, out in the open, easy to educate on issues. And, folks did eventually come together and rally together and drop a lot of the petty things. We the big message at the tail end of that is like, hey, we were able to stop this because so many different groups, seemingly incongruous groups, came together and said, this is not what we want. We need to maintain that somehow, some way. Don't fall apart into your hyper specific representative groups where you're just going to care about little individual things within this huge tapestry of amazing opportunity that we have. And also, like, they're not going to be silly enough to try to push this one thing again
Mhm.
because they got spanked so hard. So, what they're going to do is they are going to do a lot of small things all at the same time. And that's what we've seen. And we've also seen the groups because there's just not many groups out there who, and it's a capacity thing. BHA is a prime example of that, right? Like, our scope is very large. So we do talk about a lot of these issues and we work on a lot of these issues and we try to tie the dots for everybody amongst these issues. Whereas lots of other groups are very narrow for a good reason. It makes the business function better. But they're like, ooh, that one's outside of our scope and that one's outside of our scope. So we're only going to talk about monuments and we're only going to talk about them in this way. Or we're only going to talk about the roadless rule as it pertains to, spawning salmonids.
Mhm.
We're only going to talk about, and therein lies this big problem. So you have all these different things happening at once. They seem not connected, but if you take, and I just went up and hunted grizzly bears in Alaska last year. And, I'd gone out there and guided a gajillion years ago. And someplace I always wanted to come back to and finally got to make it happen. And actually had a grizzly tag in my pocket, which was crazy for me because, I mean, that stuff is so prohibitively expensive. And so a real spoiled kid opportunity. And I grew up with grizzlies here in Montana, probably had more interactions with them than most people. And it's something that I want to see managed by the states and would love to see a hunt happen in the lower 48. So this ESA language change that kind of provides this off ramp from threatened status and going from a federally managed species to a state managed species is something that I am in support of. But when you take that in the context of the the stated intent to review all wilderness study areas and ultimately get rid of them, the stated intent to review all proposed wilderness areas and get rid of them, the stated intent to rescind the roadless rule and get rid of it, the stated intent to make it mandatory to expand, full size OHV in every management plan. Then you have to go back to that ESA statement and go, oh, okay, somebody who knows grizzly bears, I know that we can have a sustainable, well managed hunt throughout the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem as it stands right now. And I know that there's areas around the greater Yellowstone ecosystem where we could have a sustainable, well managed, renewable hunt. However, both of those areas have a lot of fringe areas that are designated roadless, that are WSAs. And if those things go away and we see expansion of road and trail networks that are designated in such a way that they bring high numbers of humans at a rapid rate, well, that kind of changes that ability to have a well managed, renewable, sustainable hunt in perpetuity. Because all those sanctuary areas that these low fecundity species need, as our grizzly bears, are now in a totally different context. So the burden of education is on all of us all the time. But one thing that people need to understand is like this stuff is all connected,
Mhm,
and you got to be paying attention. You got to be weighing in on all of it because it's all important.
mhm.
And if you want, as I do, to see all that good work around the reviving of a species, especially a big charismatic species like the grizzly bear, be rewarded with coming off of this list, then we can't get rid of the habitat. And there's so much that goes to this, Jeff, that I know right? It's
Yeah,
like roadless doesn't mean there are no roads and no trails.
yeah. And roadless
Um,
means something different in Montana than it does in Alaska, and here in
yes,
Southeast Alaska, there have been dozens of projects that have allowed roads to be built for hydroelectric plants, for hard rock mining, so like you're digging tunnel mining, not like open pit mining. South of Prince of Wales has some of those mines, and that's all correct application of it. It is what is reasonable, what is rational, and that's built into the roadless rule. So it's not an absolute no road will ever be built, but that's just not something that people really understand. And so when they just hear roadless rule, well, it's different in maybe Montana, the application there versus Idaho versus Alaska. So how do you kind of deal with the inevitabilities of people saying, well, BHA isn't doing enough to protect, where I'm at, or how do you, as a large organization, how do you try to meet the needs of all of these areas and to educate people on the differences and why it is all interconnected, like you said, how obviously that's a difficult thing. You probably don't have a silver bullet for all that, but how do you manage helping people understand and then also address their grievances?
man. Yeah, it's a great question, right? And we're a volunteer led organization too, so we have including staff that are paid through government grants for very specific work, like uh, modifying and removing fence within migration corridors on BLM. You know, pretty specific. They're not out going to DC and advocating on these issues. We have 35 staff, spread across North America. And so we're heavily reliant, and and ideally we're just one big team with our volunteers who can be incredibly dedicated and incredibly knowledgeable people. And typically we see them hop on board when it's their issue in the spotlight, right? And the benefit of the chapter model, having a group in every state, and Alaska is like one of the prime examples, right? Is we're going to be involved in Alaska in the way that the members of the Alaska chapter want BHA to be involved. We're using local language because it's local experience that's driving the need, right? And we're reacting to that need, or being proactive in regards to that need. There's a lot of examples of, like, you know, NGOs coming in with this like savior type of mentality, and they use this language that's very effective for wherever their large donor base is, and it's almost always not right where the issue is,
Right.
right? And so you might be fundraising in New York City off of something like Ambler Road, but your group is disaffecting the people nearest and dearest to Ambler Road because they're like, God, that language does not represent us.
Right.
I don't know where they got their talking points from,
Mhm.
you know? So are we always hitting the nail on the head? I guarantee you not. But that is our absolute goal, right? Is this is a grassroots organization where the grassroots push that stuff up. And when we take it national, that's the perspective and the language that we use. And then it's our job as staff to tell people like why this is.
Mhm.
And I think that helps a lot. It definitely makes the organization different when it's your passion project, right? You can see it from like a very specific scope, and it can be hard to like get everybody on board because they're like, well, you guys aren't talking about this the way I, as a marten
Mm.
trapper,
Yeah.
see this issue, right? And it's like, yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
tough. I don't know if it's reassuring or not, but once you become aware of the preservationist versus conservationist perspectives, you become aware that this is a centuries old discussion, argument, whatever. Like in the corner crossing in the lower 48, that is that started like the railroads in the 1860s or something, wasn't it? Something. So, and then Alaska, obviously, management of fish, and escapement and all these sort of things. This has been happening for a very long time, this argument. So I'm not sure if it's reassuring that this is just the latest chapter in an ongoing discussion about how we manage the lands, or if it's worse now than it ever has been. So, you understand, you've talked about the history of this conservationist versus preservationist and what we should do with the land. Do you think that today ranks as one of the most critical threats ever? Is it just the latest chapter in an ongoing discussion about what to do with the land, or historically, where do we sit as far as this ongoing talk?
I think we're in like a giant marketing study, right? Like, you go back to like that 1860 example, right? It's like most people, if you could read,
Mm,
like you got your news because somebody outside of a saloon took the local paper and tacked it up outside as a means to like draw people in, right? Now everybody's so hyper connected, and we need to make sure that you like it is just pragmatic, nonpartisan messaging that breaks these issues down. because, you know, one thing that we talk about a lot, and it kind of gets mixed up in an R3 type of, or, you know, reactivation, recruitment, retention conversation is, well, it's like, well, are hunters going to care about these places if they can't hunt them?
Mm.
Corner crossing would be one of those issues too, right? Well, you know, there's a lot of loggers out there that log and they don't hate the landscape and they don't hate the resource and they don't, right? And it's because that they're out there, they're going, oh my God, these places are amazing. Right. And we have lots of folks in extractive industry that are part of our membership base
Mhm.
that can help inform what we do. And like I've said this in many, many offices in DC, like lumping in all extractive use, all extractive industry into this, like you said, like it's like that old preservationist mindset of like, well, nothing can come out here.
No one
It's
can
like, well,
step on it.
yeah. And it's like, you know how many dollars that start up in the oil field end up at a Pheasants Forever banquet or a Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation banquet, or ideally buying something off of a BHA raffle because they're making good money and then they're outside people and they take their families out hunting and fishing on the weekends or during their weeks off, right? And they're huge conservationists. And we need those people to be as invested in all of these conversations as, you know, whatever the opposite of that is,
Mhm.
and know that they have a seat at the table too, because they don't want to see the wild places go away. And you know, it just gets really tricky
Mhm.
because, you know, I had this conversation. I got blindsided by a couple of very aggressive Bozeman, Montana Sierra Club volunteers the other day, and they were talking about this timber project going on up Highlight Canyon. Highlight Canyon above Bozeman is where we get our drinking water. And they're like, sign this petition, stop the logging project. And I said, oh, you know, I don't have anything wrong with that logging project. And they snapped right back. They said, oh, so you want to get rid of all old growth forest? And I was like, boy, I'm not intimately familiar with this project, but being, you know, in Montana, if you grow up in Montana, you take Montana history like every year,
Mhm.
or at least we used to. I'm like, I guarantee that most of that stuff was cut for mining and railroad. We're probably not like talking about old growth forest here.
Yeah.
And so I got a hold of the forest management plan and I'm like, oh, it's not a clear cut. There are some old trees. They're around like the urban interface. They're going to thin them out as part of a fire mitigation project. You know, it was just like completely. It was very effective language to achieve the goal of like get petitions on here, but it wasn't just wasn't accurate at all.
Mhm.
And we see that on the left side of the aisle, on the right side of the aisle, and it is just to go back to our how we started this conversation with like all these groups spinning off and focusing hyper focused on their one thing. That is what this accomplishes, right? It peels people away into these hyper polarized camps because when you're not delivering the facts of what is happening on the ground and how it affects the end user, you're just trying to get those signatures on the petition. You've created a story that is so wildly incongruous with what the facts are and hyper wildly distant from what the other group's saying that like there is no like the ability to come back and meet in the middle is slim. It's
Sure.
hard,
Yeah.
right? But I think, you know, therein lies a lot of the strategy too, right?
Yeah.
Is boy, if you want to get something passed, you better not let these groups talk to each other and get aligned on anything.
Yeah.
So how do we do that?
Yeah. You've hunted on both sides of the proliferation of social media. How has it impacted like hunting itself, storytelling, and then also obviously conservation because it could be a powerful tool for great storytelling, also for advocacy, but can also be used negatively.
Yep.
And so, what have kind of you seen? Obviously, it's a mixed bag. It's not clearly good. It's not clearly bad. But what have you seen about the social media?
Yeah, it's such a funny thing. Like it was, in our circles, it just started out as such an anomaly. Like, why would people want to spend their time that way? I got on Instagram because my mom was like, "Hey, if you get on this, I will know what's going on with you."
That's great.
And
Instagram, not even Facebook, or did you skipped over Facebook?
yeah, it wasn't really a
Dang,
Facebook. I had
good for you.
or I guess I have a Facebook page that's been around, but
You're
um,
late onset social media.
yes, and there's a gajillion. Like, if I could snap my fingers and have it go away, I would.
Mm,
The benefit is if we can get people on the same page, it's one of the most effective tools out there for setting the social requirements to go out and do what we do in a responsible and renewable way. I don't care if you're, a single track motorized user or a halibut fisherman or a duck hunter or whatever it is. The social alignment is a more powerful tool than the idea that you're going to get stopped and checked by a game warden or a law enforcement officer, because like the odds just aren't that great
mhm,
for a lot of the things that we do. And that's the way it's always been. So it's like social media's place in the world, like to be used for good instead of evil, right? Is to set the social bar higher and higher when it comes to being a responsible duck hunter, being a responsible hunter, fisherman, whatever it is, right? And I think that's like the what we all need to be striving to do, right? Is
mhm,
like if you're posting stuff up there, include picking up some trash now and then,
mhm,
include, these goodwill things that help elevate the bar of our user groups, because it's like it doesn't do us any good, or it uh, as BHA, like we can say, hey, like ride responsibly, right? The group that's got bumper stickers that say use the quads God gave you, which is a great bumper sticker. And
mhm,
I certainly gravitate to the human powered side of things, but I take the motorized things to get to where I do
right,
my human powered things. And so like we need people within whatever group it is, motorized, hunt, fish, to be like, hey, if you want to be fishing this stream with your kids during the steelhead run, carry one of these things with you and ball up all this mono that you
mhm,
find. Do something more to improve the resource every time that you're out there and just make it part of your deal.
mhm,
And that to me is the place for social media.
mm,
The list, the misuse is long and depressing, right?
right,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Kind of in closing here, why should an Alaskan join BHA? And if an Alaskan is already a member of BHA, how can they become more involved so they're not just getting the magazine or they don't just have the claim that they're doing something because their dues are going to something. So why would an Alaskan join or why should an Alaskan join BHA? And then if they're already a member, what can they do to be more active?
I think the biggest reason is you will have a community of people that are invested as much, if not more, in the same things that you are. You're going to be aligned, and you will have a collective voice that can actually move the needle, right? In an Alaskan way, with the support of a North American organization. So I'm here to support you guys and elevate the big issues. And we're just at a time on the spectrum right now where everything that we have up until now is not here by chance. It's because people
Mm,
stood up and demanded it. It is your turn. It is our turn right now to do the exact same thing. Because if we do not, we are going to see a lot of changes. And we know, and I think Alaskans see this in a huge, huge way, right? Like as conditions change, climate change, whatever you feel comfortable calling it, things aren't the same anymore.
Mhm.
And as these things change, these decisions made in DC have much greater impacts on the ground than people really know, right? And in these unbelievable boreal landscapes of Alaska, big decisions that lead to big mistakes they don't come back to the way they were,
Mhm.
right? And things are changing fast without big mistakes, right? So join the chapter, get informed. You can get the newsletter without joining the chapter. Our folks on the ground in Alaska, the staff up there are really exceptional people. They're in the room, so you don't have to be. They're moving all over the state to be a part of the meetings that are going on in regards to roadless and Ambler Road. And my goodness, from a lower 48 perspective, the crazy overlapping system that Alaskans deal with and all the acronyms. So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty overwhelming at times for
yep.
sure.
And subsistence and recreation. And, you know, if you join, you're going to be assured that you have a seat at the table and your interests are going to be known and you're going to have the opportunity to fight for them.
Mm. Anything else in closing? Anything we didn't hit on or anything you wanna to drive home?
How many hours you got, Jeff?
I yeah, yeah, that's the way it is. But yeah, thanks for being on here. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. We'll do it again. There's lots of things to update on. So, but I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Please like and share. If you found today's conversation useful, you can go deeper with my writing on Substack. That's where I expand on these ideas from the show, share essays, reporting, and things I'm thinking about in real time. You can find it at From the 49th on Substack. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.